All right, guys, we're 6:30. We're glad that you joined us here tonight. We're going to do what we always do in here. We're going to do a little follow-up from Sunday morning. We've been doing a marriage series. One of the interesting things about a marriage series is that we could go to passages that deal directly and specific with marriage and the role of the wife, the role of the husband, some of that kind of stuff. But Doc and I haven't done that. Instead, what we've done is we've focused on general truths about following Jesus, and then applied them, used marriage kind of as an illustration as to what it looks like practically. And so the things that we've discussed so far in this marriage series, and the things that we're following up with again on Wednesday nights, are such a nature that this isn't a necessity. If you aren't married, this is still going to apply. If you're divorced, this is still going to apply. If you've ever had to talk to anybody in your life, this is information that's going to be valuable for you, okay? Just simple relational components of what it looks like to be a Jesus follower, and then how that impacts into our relationships. Now, we're talking about marriage, so we're drawing a direct application to that specific area, but everything we're saying can and should be used in all sorts of other relationships. So that's what we're doing. Tonight we're going to do a little bit of a follow-up from Sunday, and then we're going to take just kind of a completely different conversation outside of that. We'll get there in a minute. A couple of housekeeping things. We're going to pass around a sheet to take some attendance, just to see where people are going and what they're doing. That's useful for us as we try to prepare different offerings on Wednesday nights. So if you participate in that, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you've been here before, you should find your name, put a check mark. If you've not been here before, that's fine. Just write your name on the bottom of one of the pages, and then we'll make sure that we have you on it for next week. And then if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand. Mr. Huber in the back is prepared with a microphone to come and help you out so that we can all hear your question. So Marty, are we going to start with Marty, or are we going to do that later? You're going to wait till you can surprise us. Okay, there we go. Fantastic. All right, so we'll do that at some point, but you are also welcome to raise your hand and ask a question. We'll bring the mic to you so we can all hear it. And that's kind of the format and what we'll be doing. Anything I leave out? I thought of one thing, but we'll do it in a moment. Why don't you go ahead and pray?
Father, we're grateful that we can be here tonight together. We're grateful that you are here in our midst in a very special way. We pray that, Lord, if you nudge us, that we will be receptive. And now we pray that the words of our mouths and the thoughts of our hearts will please you. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
All right, one more thing concerning marriage. We are doing a marriage retreat March 21st through the 23rd. That's a Friday night through Sunday morning. So we'll start that evening on Friday night, something around 6 o'clock, something like that. In fact, I think we even have the potential for dinner that night. I guess you could eat before you get there. Anyways, we've got it Friday night through Sunday morning. We're going to have 6 different sessions with a gentleman named Kurt Montooth, who's a licensed and trained counselor. He's going to walk us through different aspects of marriage for the purpose of strengthening our marriages. So there'll be some stuff on Friday night. There'll be things throughout the day Saturday, and then there'll be a little bit more on Sunday morning. Saturday is going to give us some opportunity to just have some free time. It's not going to be all just sitting in a room listening to a guy teach. So there'll be opportunities for you and your spouse to be able to do some other things. It's in Cumberland Falls State Park, which I've never been to, but I've heard it seems to be a nice place. So we're going to be there. It's a great opportunity. $300 gets you the weekend, which is not, I think, too expensive, especially when you factor in you're going to have a room for 2 nights. I think it's very reasonably priced. It does not include your meals, but they've got some stuff that are on site to take care of all those kind of things, so bring a little bit extra for that. And we have lots of room available still if you're wanting to sign up. We've got a good amount that have signed up, but we still got lots of room. There is a deadline for signing up. I'm going to tell you it's February 21st. That's a soft deadline. But if you sign up before then, I can guarantee you we'll have spots. After the 21st, I'm going to cut them down, and they may get filled up, and then we don't have anything left. So if it's something you're thinking about doing, I'd encourage you to go ahead and sign up sooner rather than later. You can sign up with a deposit without paying the whole amount and pay the rest at a later date. That's cool, too. So anyways, want to make sure you guys are aware of that. You can find all that on our website. You can find that on the Church Center app, all those kinds of things. Super easy and convenient for you to get plugged in and be a part of that. All right. It's a lot of stuff. I've already wasted 4 minutes. Okay, here we go. And then this has been working off and on. All right. Let's talk about humility. That was kind of the big idea, a big word of the day that we talked about on Sunday. And we're going to start with some misunderstandings, okay? I think sometimes we misunderstand what the word humility means. And I think this is one of them. Oftentimes when we think about humility, we think that the opposite of pride is humility, or the opposite of humility is pride, okay? That they're opposites. I don't believe that, okay? I don't think that they're actually opposites. I think that there's a different opposite of pride. Opposite of pride is self-deprecation. I think humility is neutral, okay? And what I mean by that is there's a sense in which we tell ourselves, and this is kind of the next misunderstanding, so maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. In fact, let's just go there, okay? Second misunderstanding that I think we have with all this is that humility is thinking lowly of yourself. You ever felt that one? That's the one that hits me in particular, okay? I can remember as a kid being very nervous about being too proud of anything that I'd accomplished. Because I felt like that was going to be pride and that wasn't humility. And so I had this mindset where I was always trying to convince myself I was less than what I actually was. Does that make sense? And it was under this idea of humility. I was trying to be like honoring. I was trying to be a good person. I was trying to be like Jesus. And so I'm trying to think of myself less than I actually was. And I don't think that's humility. I think humility is thinking accurately of yourselves, recognizing that you have gifts. You also have struggles. Does that make sense? Okay? And so the ability to look at yourself and say, I have this ability, I have this strength, I have this gift from God, is not an act of pride, it's an act of truth. Can be. Some people think highly of themselves in areas that they don't have those gifts, okay? But it can be, humility can be something where you recognize, I am blessed and I'm honored by God. He's given me this ability, while also recognizing that I'm not perfect. I still have my flaws, my faults, my struggles as well. It's seeing yourself accurately. Does that make sense? Okay? That for me is really, really helpful. In a scale, if you have pride and you have self-deprecation, so that would be seeing yourself below what you actually are, those would be opposites. Humility is a neutral thing in the middle. It's seeing the things of you that are good, it's seeing the things of you that are not as good, and seeing yourself truthfully and accurately. Does that make sense? Okay? You have anything on that?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So this is predominantly the way in which I've viewed humility as I've grown and matured and tried to understand what this looks like.
One little piece before we go on from this.
Okay.
When it says humility is thinking accurately of yourself, you're all twits. A sinner, right? All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That is accurate. I'm also loved by God. I have a worth that has been given to me by God. That's also accurate. Okay? So when you say it's thinking accurately of yourself, that doesn't mean that you overlook in any fashion your brokenness. You acknowledge your brokenness to the fullest. The only shot I've got is grace. Right? But in combination with that, I also recognize that God sees me as valuable enough to extend grace. And so accepting the fact that I am valuable because God has made me such, not because I have earned such, and at the same time recognizing that, holy cow, why in the heck would God give me grace? Because I'm broken and I mess up a bunch, right? So when you're talking about thinking accurately of yourself, that doesn't mean in any fashion denying the fact that you are absolutely in need of grace. You'll get nothing without it, okay? But it also recognizes that you have value and worth because God cares for you, and that's enough. I think that's fair.
And it's not uncommon to have someone come, at least for me, I would assume that you would agree with this. It's not uncommon that whenever someone comes into a position where they're interested in a relationship with God, that they're kind of starting to fill it out, they have an issue with this in one of two ways. Either they struggle with the fact that they're seen as not a good enough person and that they're so desperate or in need of grace, they can't rationalize, they can't reason in their mind that they're that low. Or, and I think this is maybe even more frequent, you have a hard time convincing someone that they're actually worth the sacrifice of Jesus. I think we struggle with it in those very practical ways. I think all of us tend to lean one way or the other. We either see ourselves too highly or we see ourselves too lowly. It kind of takes some work to find that neutral where you see yourself accurately.
One of the guys that I read periodically on humility, it's written in the 1600s, his name is Charles Taylor, who wrote these kind of this description of humility. And he says that if you know that you're a jerk, why does it bother you that others agree with you? Now that's my paraphrase, but essentially that's what he said.
Yep, all right. This is, I think, a helpful definition. This is an inward definition, like inward, okay, looking inward, okay? This is looking at you within your own relationship with yourself, okay? If you start applying this outward, it goes back towards this definition that we used on Sunday morning. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, like in self-deprecation type of a mindset, okay? But humility is thinking of yourself less. Does that make sense? Okay? So what it means is you're just focused on yourself less. You're more aware of the need of the people around you. You're more attentive to the things that they may need from you. And you're open to those ways in which you can be of service, okay? Especially in the context of a marriage. This is a beautiful picture of humility, okay? Two people who are mutually interested in the needs of the other person, okay? Think about it like this. Go back a couple weeks where Doc started this out and he talked about love and then he talked about sacrifice and service. And we even got into a little bit into like areas of sex, okay? And he pulled some scripture that talked about, it's from 1 Corinthians where it says the woman's body is no longer her body, but it belongs to the husband. The husband's body is no longer his body, but it belongs to his wife, okay? What that means is you ought to be more concerned about the needs of your spouse than you are yourself. It's humility practically played out. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's kind of how we defined it. Sunday, you got anything you want to add to that one? Okay. Now then, regardless of which one of these two definitions you want to focus on, it affects how we view this question. Okay? Either one, it's still going to shade how we answer this question. Do you want to be humble? Do you want to see yourself truthfully, or do you find comfort in seeing yourself in the way in which you lean already previously, okay? Or do you want to be someone who's thoughtful of others all the time, or do you want to be focused on the self, okay? Do you want to be humbled? Now, I think, and Doc and I had some interesting conversation about this earlier, so we'll see if he wants to open this back up. I think that most of us say yes to this question, but we say yes because we know it's the right answer. Okay? We live in a world, and I mentioned this Sunday morning, Jesus changed the world so much that we want to say yes to this question. Before Jesus, no one would have dreamed of saying yes to this question. But he's so shaped and changed the world. Now this is something that's seen as a positive character trait. And all of us want to say yes to it, but I think the vast majority of us don't really want to say yes to it. I think we want to look like we're a humble person, but we don't want to actually be humble because we want everybody else to just think more about us. Is that fair? I think that's reality. You had some different thoughts on that earlier. I don't know if you want to go there now or you want to wait.
No, it's interesting. I think you're probably more right than wrong. You make an excellent point, okay? Because we want to be humble, but on the other hand, we are pretty self-absorbed, and self-absorption is pretty much the opposite of humility. And because of that, we want to be humble. And yet, on the other hand, we want things to feed us. We want it to be around us. And so I think that's an excellent point. Okay? Where I kicked back at first was just a little bit different in that none of us wants, what's the opposite of humility? And you can come up with your own definition, whether it's arrogance or self-centered or however you want to do it. No one wants to be seen as the opposite of humble. You don't want to be a jerk, right? You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to be self-centered, although you kind of want to be self-centered. And so I would go back to one of the ways that Randy and I periodically say things like this. We want to be humble. Okay? I want to be humble. But I don't entirely want to be humble because I'm pretty self-absorbed. But I also am a Jesus follower. And so I want to do what God wants. I want to do what is right. I want to do good. I want what God wants for me. So I want to be humble. But I struggle being humble, right? And I think that's probably not a bad way to put it, because all of us as Jesus followers recognize that humility is called for by God, and it's the character trait of a good man or woman. We are humble people. We're also battling with sin, which is that self-absorption that just bleeds inside of us. And so I think I want to be humble.
Well, I think the opposite was self-absorption that you mentioned earlier. I used the word cocky when we talked about this earlier. The opposite of humility, whatever you want to call that, okay? I think that if we ask that, do you want that to be you? Do you want to be that? I think we would say no, because we know it's the right answer. But I think there's that part of us that kind of does want to be that. Like, we want it to be about us, and we want everybody else around us to live in our world and to live according to the way that I want to live. And so there's a sense in which, no, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be viewed as the jerk. But I'd like to be so successful and so amazing that everybody else just realized I was that great. Right? Like, that's kind of how we view it. And so I think there's this interesting tug within us of knowing what's right and it not coming naturally to us, having to fight those urges or those desires within us, right? And I think you can even take it to this. Do you want the people around you to be humbled? Okay, yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's it, okay? I struggle with humility, but I wish my spouse found it very easy. Like, that would be nice, okay? That's what we're looking for. We want the people around us to be very humble, so humble that if I'm not great at being humble, it's okay, because they're going to be cool with it. Like, that would be really nice and really sweet, right? And then there's even a difference within that one, okay? Do you want to be humble, or would you like to be humbled? Those are two different things, right? Being humbled is usually not something that you agree to. It happens against your will, and it's something that kind of knocks you down a peg, even though you didn't really want to be, okay? And so we don't really want that, even though we recognize that we want to be humble. Even if we don't want to be humble, we know that we should want to be humble, but we don't want to get there by being humbled, because that one hurts. That's kind of painful. But most of the time, the way we become humble is by being humbled, right? I don't know if I've told you this story or not. You would at least appreciate this. I learned to stop trash talking about football when I was in 4th grade. Okay? I was a San Francisco 49ers fan in 1993, 94. It was one of those years. I grew up in West Texas, where the Dallas Cowboys ruled everything. And so being a 49ers fan, I was instantly an outcast.
That's not just West Texas.
I know. I told you you're going to love this story. And so in 4th grade, it was leading up. The 49ers and Cowboys had been the best two teams for several years in a row. And I was sure that, the Cowboys had won the Super Bowl the year before. I was sure this was the year the 49ers were going to get there. I talked trash all week long, not to my friends, to the kids I didn't like at school. Like, I was talking trash to kids that I was actually scared of. I don't know why. It was very dumb of me, okay? But I did. I talked trash all week long about how the 49ers were going to win. And then the Cowboys traveled to San Francisco. I can tell you like details about this game. Like, it was the week when it had rained all week long in San Francisco leading up to it.
Make your excuses.
And the field was a slop. No. I'm helping you out. The 49ers made sure that they dumped all the water from the stadium onto the Dallas Cowboys sideline, like, just to make it more difficult for them. And I was like, oh, we've got this in the bag. And then the Cowboys whipped them. And I skipped school the next day. Right? Because I was scared to go to school. I was literally scared. And by Tuesday, when I showed up to school, and again, my mom was not like soft on me, okay? I don't know if she really believed I was sick that day or if she just had so much compassion. I don't know what really happened. But I got to stay home that day. I went to school the next day, and they were brutal. 48 hours was not enough time for them to come down off of that win. And I got it. I got it all. And that's when I learned, you know what? I'll talk after games, not before games. Because it was painful, right? It's much worse to be humbled than to just start out being humble. And I think we know that, all right? We know that. We don't want that, though, because really we don't want to be humble. If you go back in that story, what I really wish would have happened was the 49ers would have won. I didn't want to learn how to be humble. I wanted my team to win. That would have been a much better outcome, right?
Yeah, if you think about being humbled, I'll bet that each one of you can think of a time when you were humbled and it was painful, right? It may have been in school and you turned in an assignment which you thought was good and you got wasted on it, right? It may have been a project that you were trying to do and you thought it was up to par, and when it was scored, it really wasn't. Or something else you attempted to do. But you can think of times when you were humbled, and it can be very, very painful, right? They can also be some of the greatest growing times in your life. Those experiences when you were humbled. Sometimes it takes you to a brand new level, if you take it right, correct? If you don't take it right, then it's not going to have that kind of an outcome. But there are times when you are humbled that you recognize that is, you needed that humbling in order to make that next step forward.
And again, we, especially in the context of marriage, we like to think about our spouse in these terms. If they would be humbled, it would be better for our marriage, right? If they would just kind of get knocked down a peg, then everything else would be better. That's how we like to look at it, okay? And there's this principle, I'm gonna give you this statement about humility, but I'm gonna show you a principle that I deeply believe, that I think oftentimes people miss this. And because they miss this, nothing changes and nothing grows, okay? So we're gonna start with this off of humility. I said this Sunday morning. The only person who could be humbled and it would change your life is you, okay? So oftentimes we think about, man, if they would be humbled, then it would make my life better. That's not a guarantee. There's a chance that they could be humbled, they'd learn nothing from it, and nothing better happens. Nothing happens, right? However, if you were to be humbled, and you actually learn from it in a way that helps you to grow and to change, well, then you will have a changed life. It wasn't the way you were hoping it would happen, but now something has changed, okay? There's this principle of change I often talk about with married couples. Oftentimes we want something to change in our relationship with our spouse. We don't like where our marriage is at. We don't like what's happening. And we think that they are the problem. If they would change, our marriage would be better. If they were humbled, our marriage would get better. When in reality, if you would change, then the marriage will change. And you can't control whether or not your spouse is going to change, but you have 100% control over whether or not you're going to change. Does that make sense? And so what happens is oftentimes we sit back waiting for the other person to change, and then, you say, well, if they will change, then I'm going to change, and then over time, nothing ever happens. Nothing ever changes because we have two stubborn people waiting for the other person to make a move. Whereas, if you want a better relationship, you start changing. And even if they don't participate, even if they don't respond in that, you'll probably have something of a more healthy relationship because one of the people became more healthy. Does that make sense? Okay? It's a step in the right direction. You got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, one other piece on that, and that is that oftentimes you not only desire your spouse to change, but you want to be the agent of that change. You want to be the one to humble your spouse. That's pretty stupid, right? Rarely works out quite the way you expect. And it goes both ways. There are times when men try to humble their wives, and there are times when women try to change their husbands. They try to work it out in such a fashion that they can effect that change. And be careful on that. Be just really, really careful. Focus as much as you can on changing yourself rather than transforming your partner. And that's the same basic principle. You're likely not the one to bring humility to your spouse. Now, there may be times when that happens, but if it's your goal and your quest, then that's probably a stupid quest, I think.
And there's a weird dynamic of this, right? Because within your life, there's no one who's going to know you as well as your spouse, who's going to have the ability to speak into your life and see your shortcomings and see the places that you could grow. And so the best person in the world is your spouse to come along and help you see ways that you can be the better version of yourself. But it's also the most dangerous person to come along and offer those insights, because it's very complicated to be able to say something that means so much in a way that can be received, okay? And that's actually what I want to spend some time on next, okay? Now, we've talked a lot about humility from Sunday and this week. We've talked about gentleness last week. We talked about sacrifice and service a few weeks ago. I think that one of the core, I think the core foundational piece of any marriage is communication. I think that most of the issues and conflict that we face in our marriage is communication based. And even if the conflict you're having isn't because of communication, the way it's resolved is through communication. And so the vast majority of a healthy marriage is going to be wrapped around the ability to communicate in healthy ways. That's my philosophy on what this looks like, okay? So this past Sunday, I actually talked a lot about fighting, mainly because I kind of wanted to make the case that when we fight, it's an act of pride, it's not an act of humility. Oftentimes what happens in a marriage, especially when there's conflict, is we have two people deciding to get what they want as opposed to give what the other person needs or what they want, okay? So that's just kind of a foundational piece. I wanted to spend some time talking tonight about healthy ways to fight, which is kind of fun. But I felt like before we could get there, we've got to talk about communication. There's healthy ways to communicate. There's unhealthy ways to communicate. And if we're not communicating in healthy ways, then we can't expect to even fight in healthy ways. Does that make sense? So I don't think we're going to get there. We may get to talk about fighting in fun, healthy ways. Not fun, but in healthy ways. I don't think we're going to get there. I think we're going to spend the rest of the night talking about communication and kind of breaking down what healthy communication looks like in a marriage. Sound good? That's where we're going next. Here we go. We're going to talk through some marriage communication guidelines that I think are going to be helpful for everybody. Even again, if you're not married, this is going to be helpful for any relationship that you have. If you are married, it's going to be helpful for your relationships outside of marriage, okay? These are just good tips. And we're going to start with this understanding from Proverbs 18:21. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit, okay? When we talk about communication, I think it's a huge foundational piece to marriages. But it has the ability to be a powerful good or a powerful evil within your marriage. You have the ability to have something beautiful in a marriage and communication, and you have the ability to tear apart just as much. Okay, two other verses that speak the same thing. Proverbs 25:11 says, "A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold and settings of silver." I think that's a weird verse. I don't want apples of gold and settings of silver. That doesn't make sense to me, okay? But it sounds pretty, I guess. And I think that's what he's saying. A good word at the right time is beautiful. It's uplifting, it's building, it's powerful for the good. Just as much in Job 19:2, how long will you torment me with your words? All right? That's the truth as well. Words can be absolutely tormenting to us, okay? And I don't think I'm saying anything you don't know or believe. You're mature adults. You all understand both sides of this. You have received both sides of this. You've probably given both sides of this. And so recognizing that when we're talking about communication, there is a powerful tool here, something that can be used for good and something that can do tons and tons of damage. Before I go further, Marty, did you want to say anything? You got a question? You're good? Not yet. Okay. All right. Here we go. Step number one.
One thing before you go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things you keep into when you're talking about this stuff on the power of words, recognize that rarely are the two people in a relationship equally adept with words, okay? And that unevenness creates all kinds of issues. In most cases, not all, in most cases, women are better with words than guys. And because they're better with words than guys, they have a tendency to be able to whip their guys pretty easily, because guys can't talk as easily. And if they can talk, they have a harder time connecting their thoughts to their words. That's just one of the ways our brains are wired, okay? Especially in the moment. Guy usually takes a little bit longer to try to figure out how to express what he's thinking. And so just recognize there's an unevenness when it comes to words. Now, there's some guys who are professionals with words, and so it doesn't always apply to every guy. And sometimes there are ladies who are not good with words, and guys can out-talk them. Just because you win an argument with words doesn't mean you're right. Recognize that there's unevenness in marriages with respect to your words, and respect that, honor that difference, okay? Words can kill, words can give life, words are often an unfair advantage in all kinds of things. And so just, recognize those differences. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it makes complete sense. And one of the things I meant to say before we went to the next slide is that most of these tips that we're going to give, we might laugh at. Because they're kind of simplistic, okay? But the reason we're laughing at them is because right now we're not in a moment where we have to make sure we're communicating well. We're not in a tense moment of conflict. It's easy to look at these things and say, well, yeah, duh, that's easy. Of course that's there, right? But it's because we're not being tested in it right now. It's really hard to communicate effectively when there's a little bit of pressure and when there's something on the line, okay? And so recognize that. Also realize this, especially in marriage, there's got to be an attitude shift. Your spouse is not your enemy, okay? I know sometimes in a marriage it can feel like that, but that's a bad place to be in. There's got to be a switch in the mind that says we're on the same team. We want the same thing. We're hoping for the same thing. We want to have the same kind of a home. We want to have the same kind of a life. We want to have a healthy relationship. We want to be able to enjoy each other. That there has to be this understanding that we're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to be teammates, not adversaries, okay? Which means then, if you can switch that perspective, as in they're not against me or they're not trying to make my life harder, okay, but that we're actually on the same team. If that shift can be made, especially by both people, okay, well, then you start looking at these things and you realize how this could be something really, really good and healthy, okay? Does that make sense? Got to keep that kind of as to what Doc was saying. You may not be equally matched in forms of ability to communicate. But the goal should not be to win an argument. The goal should be to be unified as a husband and a wife. And I think we miss that a lot of times. I think we fall into this trap of, I'm going to prove myself, I'm right about this, I'm going to hold my ground, all those kinds of things. And we forget that the purpose is that we would be unified together as a couple. You've got to keep that in perspective, okay? All right, let's get into a couple of these. Tip number one, be a ready listener. Don't answer until the other person has finished talking, okay? And you're going to notice there's a couple verses down here. I'm not going to spend the time going and reading each of these verses and showing them to you. I'm telling you that these are just places where there's biblical wisdom communicating these same things, okay? So if you want to take pictures of this, if you don't get this but you want to have access to this, send me an email afterwards. I'll send you this presentation where you can go back and check all that kind of stuff if you're the kind of person who wants to do that, okay? This is a huge, huge issue, and it sounds really simplistic because right now you're not in the middle of an argument, all right? But oftentimes when the temperature raises, the blood pressure raises, it gets a little bit tense, this becomes a very difficult thing to do. We know this is true and we know this is good. I think we also know this isn't easy.
Yeah, I'd just make one caveat on this, one modification a little bit. There are some people who in an argument just filibuster, they just keep talking, right? And that's not fair either, to keep talking and so that you don't listen, right? And so when it talks about here, be a ready listener, don't answer until the other person has finished talking. And I've been in a counseling session before, the person has started talking, it's been 20 minutes before I can open my mouth, right? And they've said all kinds of things in the middle of that, right? In a marriage, that's not smart, it's not good. Both partners, if it's going to be healthy, have to be ready listeners. It's not a matter of filibustering the other and just continuing to talk. Make your point, right? Listen to the point. Don't cut them off before they've made their point. But don't just keep on going and going and going so they can never get a word in. That's silliness.
I've taught this stuff for years. I've never shared it with Doc. I was really looking forward to doing all this with Doc tonight to hear his perspectives on some of this. That's a point I've never even considered. That's an idea I hadn't even made an emphasis about. What I usually do talk about is that ready listener part, because most of the time we're not listening to what's being said. We're waiting for them to take a breath so we can say what we want to say, right? So that's the other side of it. One is we can just control the conversation. The other one is I'm not really interested in listening to anything you're saying. I'm just waiting to say what I have to say. And then I expect you to listen, even though I know full well I'm not listening. It's a dangerous, dangerous situation, isn't it, all right? And I see you guys laughing because it makes sense to all of us.
As a guy, though, sometimes, I just in a counseling session, because I'm really a guy, right? And oftentimes they say more words than I can listen to.
That's a real thing. That's a real thing. That happens. Okay.
And I have to keep smiling. I can't be mean.
Yeah. That's what's hard about being a counselor, is you have to be your best possible self, man.
Shh.
Yes. Man.
I can't be really mean.
Only some mean.
Some mean.
A little mean, yeah. All right. Next one, kind of going with that first one, be slow to speak. Think first. Don't be hasty in your words. Speak in such a way that the other person can understand and accept what you say. Okay? This is a big deal, okay? So you've got the verses. You're going to be familiar with those. Be slow to speak. That's going to make sense to you. Think first. This last one is usually what I like to focus in on. Speak in such a way that the other person can understand and accept what you say. Have you ever been in a conversation with your spouse and felt like, I think we're speaking two different languages? Does that ever happen? You can just nod. You don't have to yell. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, we've been there, all right? There have been times where I felt that, where I've thought, I think we're saying the same thing, but we're getting angry because we're not saying it the way the other person wants to hear it. Does that make sense? Okay? And so there has to be this patience and humility, realizing I'm not demanding that you understand how I speak. I want to find out how I can speak that you're going to understand. You see that switch? I'm more concerned with your needs than I am with mine. I'm concerned about your ability to hear this and process it and it be received in a good way. More concerned with that than I am about me saying my piece and just getting out what I feel and what I think. Does that make sense? I think it's a huge piece. I think that the best moments of me as a husband and caring for my wife have come when I've been careful with my words and considerate to how is she going to hear this? How can I say this in a way that she's going to be uplifted and encouraged by this as opposed to feeling like she's attacked?
As long as you don't interpret this, speak in such a way the other person can understand and accept, don't substitute agree. Agree with what you say. Okay? Understand, that's important. The fact is, we go after things with such different worldviews, such different backgrounds, such different philosophies. Julie and I have only been married 50 years, so we've got a ways to go, right? There are some things that I am convinced we will not agree on till the day we die. Okay? We're not going to reach agreement. And that's fine. She doesn't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with her on these issues. I want to try to understand, but I don't have to accept, right? It's honoring to understand. You don't have to reach agreement in the ideas in order to have a healthy marriage. Does that make sense to you guys? I know a lot of people are just panicked if they don't agree. Well, live with it. You're going to if you're going to stay married.
Well, and that also speaks into moments of conflict. You're in conflict because you don't agree. And so how can you communicate in a way that the other person can accept what you're saying even if they aren't in agreement, especially if it's a confrontation? If you're having a conversation with your spouse because something's going on that you don't like and you want it changed, you can be quick to speak and you can be hasty with your words, and they're going to likely feel attacked and they're going to become defensive. Or you can be careful and calculated to make sure that what you're saying is not so much about you getting out what you need to say, but it's being said in a way that they will actually receive it, and something good is much more likely to happen.
What happens, on the path that I was taking a little bit is that if you don't agree with me, I'm going to keep talking. I'll talk louder until I crush you, right? I'm going to keep talking and have to enforce that you've got it. And you have some marriages where one person is so dominant over the other that the other person doesn't have any freedom anymore, and they force agreement. Don't interpret this that way. This is important stuff. Just Just don't substitute agree for accept. You don't have to agree with each other to have a good marriage, right? There are going to be many things that you will not agree about, I think. Now, maybe that's just autobiographical. Maybe you guys have been married a long time. You agree on everything. I think you're weird if you do, but maybe you do.
Do you know people like that?
Anybody who agrees?
Like I know of a few couples that I don't think they've ever had a disagreement.
The only cases where I have seen that are where one of them is a wuss.
Maybe. I mean, that's possible. I've seen it a couple times, and I just think they're lying. I don't think it's true. I don't know. Maybe it's true, but one of them's just a wuss. That's possible. I like your explanation as well. All right, next one. Speak the truth always, but do it in love. Okay, that's a huge statement. You definitely want to be truthful and honest with your spouse. That's a huge idea. I really like this second part, though. He says, do not exaggerate. Okay? Exaggeration is not truth. Okay? I think one of the most dangerous words in a marriage, especially in a conversation that's in conflict, is when someone uses the word always. It's a dangerous word. You ever been there? You say, well, you always do this, or you always do that. That's not true. They don't always do that. Sometimes they do something different. All right? And so always is a dangerous word. That's exaggeration. And so it's true. You can say, sometimes you do this. Sometimes I see this in you. Sometimes this happens. That's truth. We use the word always. Now we're speaking untruth. We're exaggerating. We're making something into something bigger than... Larry, don't be pointing fingers. That's not wise. That's really dumb. Pointing fingers at your spouse in the middle of a conversation like this is always dumb. And that's not an exaggeration. It's a bad idea. It's a bad decision.
It's way better to point at the person next to the spouse next to the next couple.
Not your spouse, the other one?
Yeah, the other couple.
Oh.
She always does that.
Maybe. Was Larry pointing at Janet? That makes more sense.
There you go.
That's possible. All right. There we go. All right. Don't exaggerate. Anything else on that one? You good with that? I think it's a big one. Again, we're talking about communication guidelines, okay? The problem is I think we recognize, yeah, this is simple, this is truthful, duh, of course this makes sense. The problem is in the moment, that's not easy, is it? It's easy to take it to a very different place, and then you start practicing communication in unhealthy ways, and then you're picking up the pieces afterwards, okay? And so it's recognizing, and that's why I love doing this kind of stuff in a moment like this, because I'm not in a fight right now. I don't know that any of you are in a fight right now, okay? And so it's easy to look at this and stuff and say, yeah, okay, that's how it should be, and it kind of helps us reset and recalibrate the ways that we should be communicating. Here's the next one, and I don't have verses for this one. I think it's just good wisdom. Don't use silence to frustrate the other person. That one's a little hard sometimes. All right. Anybody like the silent treatment? Don't raise your hand.
I think you got silence sometimes to gather your thoughts.
Sometimes.
Don't come across the wrong way.
Sometimes silence is
But
slow to speak. Sometimes silence is slow to speak.
what he says here is don't use silence as a tool to frustrate,
Yes. That's a big shift.
okay? And so that's a little bit of a different idea. Don't use it as a weapon.
I'll tell you that this was one of the problems that I struggled with early on in our marriage. I didn't know how to have conversations around conflict that were difficult. And so oftentimes I would hear a lot and I didn't know how to process it all and I wouldn't know how to respond to it. And so I would be quiet. And I didn't necessarily do it for the purpose of trying to frustrate the other person. I really don't think I did. However, I didn't do this. And so it definitely appeared like that, okay? What I've learned, and this is even how I've counseled this specific phrase, sometimes I don't know what to say, but I've learned over the years that if I don't know what to say, I need to say that. I need to say, I'm not exactly sure what to say right now or how to respond to what you said. I need to think this through. And then that helps them understand I'm not just icing you out and giving you the silent treatment so that you have to stew. I'm taking this serious and I'm working through it. I just need some time to work through it. This is a really, really key piece to this, but very dangerous. Okay, so just as much as sometimes you have that one person who uses lots of words, they usually marry someone who doesn't. And so the one who doesn't can very easily come into this, and that's how they're going to kind of get at the other person. And so we remind ourselves, This is your spouse. They're not your enemy. We want to do what's best. We want to be unified. And so do what's healthy, even when it's hard.
Let me go back to that notion that I mentioned earlier about unevenness in our adeptness with words. Okay? I read in a book one time, I don't remember which book, I don't remember when it was, and I'm pretty sure I'm quoting it accurately, and I may not be.
No one can prove you wrong.
No one can prove me wrong at this point.
This is the value of not citing your sources.
But I read in a book one time that it takes guys typically way longer to connect their feelings to their words. Okay? It's hard for them to do that. And usually, in order for a guy to be able to do that, it takes hours. It may take until the next day for him to be able to figure out how to say what's on his mind, how to say what he feels. The connection there's a difference between the way a guy's brain and a girl's brain are wired. There's all kinds of studies that are done on that. The connection between the feelings and the words are a superhighway in a lot of ladies' brains. It's a goat path in a lot of guys' brains. And so they have a hard time putting it into words. And so she may say something, and he doesn't have any good response, can't respond, okay? Instead of just freezing it out with silence, can I think about it, talk about it tomorrow? Can I think about it? As a wife, you might have to just be proactive on that, I want to talk about this, okay? Can we talk about this evening at dinner? Can we talk about it in the morning or something like that? Silence sometimes can be very frustrating for a guy because they feel something deeply, but they don't know how to put it into words. And that needs to be respected, okay? It's not a matter of a lesser brain. It's just the way the brain is wired. It's a little bit differently. It takes some time for that to be able to be articulated. And so the key is, that's not using it to frustrate. That's the key. Silence as a weapon can be very, very damaging. Silence sometimes is because I just don't know how to respond yet. I can't put it into words yet. Does that make sense? There's a difference.
But along with that as well, if you're going to tell, in this scenario, if you're going to tell your wife, I need some time to process this, can we come back to this tomorrow? Or come back to it this evening? Make sure you bring it back that evening or tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Don't, it's the temptation for me is if everything feels smooth, then I'm going to feel like I don't need to bring this back up. And that's now a different issue, okay? And so if you said, man, we need to, I'll talk to you about this, then you be willing to initiate that conversation and start that back up. Do you want to say something?
I do.
Okay.
I'm going to give you from the woman's perspective.
Okay.
That many times I have heard that women will become silent when they don't want to communicate or don't want to ask for what they need or want or help or whatever, but that for, I think, men, if they realize that you have become quiet, there's something wrong. Because we tend not to confront or ask for what we want. We assume that if you love us, that you would know to give us what we want.
Yes, you're cruel.
It's helped many different things, so we're not communicating, what we want, but we expect you to know that something's not quite right.
Yeah, and
I'm glad you said that and not
yeah.
me.
And we laugh right now because we realize how ridiculous that is, okay? But we don't realize how ridiculous that is in the moment because we just think, oh, well, they know me, so they should know what I'm thinking. It makes sense until it doesn't make sense. Yeah, Mark?
This had happened to me because one time I had asked my father something, and I said, you have not said anything to me about this. He says, you wouldn't like to hear what I had to say. So it kind of goes to the point. If you don't have anything you really think they would like to hear, do you say anything?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so you've got the opposite end of that is the man who doesn't, they go silent because they don't want to deal with what happens if they say what they're thinking, right? Like it can go both directions. It's dangerous either way. All right.
Yeah, one more thing on that, just as an extension on that, Mark. It's not exactly the same point. There is a sense in our culture today that if you think something, you have to say it in order to be authentic. Okay? If it's on your mind, you have to get it out. That's the kind of verbiage that you'll hear people use. If I think it, I've got to say it in order to be authentic. That's terrible. It's a terrible way of thinking about it. It's not Christian. One of the things that we try to do is to recognize that there are thoughts that we have that should never be expressed, right? Because not all of our thoughts are gracious. Not all of our thoughts are true. Just because you think it, you don't have to say it to be authentic. We try to be civilized. As a Christian, that means that we don't speak truth without grace, and if you can't speak truth with grace, then shut up. You shouldn't be saying it. Nor can you speak grace without truth, right? If you're going to speak grace without truth, shut up, don't say it. You don't have to say something that's on your mind that is not both gracious and truthful, right? Otherwise, you should probably hold your tongue. It should probably never, ever be expressed. It's likely to do damage if it is expressed. And so that's just one of those things that it's countercultural. Because today we think that we have to say what's on our mind. We have to get it out. We have to spout it out. And the proper word for that is a word that I can't use in this room.
See, he just chose not to say something.
I did.
And it was helpful. All right, that was good. All right. There's no way we're going to get to talk about fighting. All right. Do not become involved in quarrels. This will get us close. It's possible to disagree without quarreling. Do you believe that? Is it possible in your marriage to not agree on something but it not turn into a fight? It can be. All right. And I like that. Don't become involved in quarrels. That's some of the language that you have different places. Sometimes I think we're too quick and eager to pick fights on things that don't need to be fights. So good communication guideline within your marriage. Don't fight over the things that don't deserve to be fought over. It's okay. There's lesser things that we can disagree on and we can move on just fine without making a big deal. This is the magnanimity that you talk about all the time applied into your marriage. Magnanimity in your marriage. If it's not a big deal to you and it's a big deal to them, let it be the way they want it to be. Go along with them, make them happy, so long as it's certainly within reason. There's all sorts of caveats to that, but yeah.
Well, this is kind of a no-brainer, to tell you the truth. Is there anybody that you agree 100% with?
You disagree with yourself.
Oh,
Have you ever changed your mind?
Yeah. You don't agree with anybody on everything. I mean, I hope you agree with God when you figure out what he wants, but other than that, a person, you're always going to have disagreements. You don't have to fight with a person because you disagree with them. Randy and I are great friends. We disagree on a bundle, and we quarrel some. Not badly, we just like to tussle over some of these ideas. But you don't have to make the other person agree with you. In a marriage, as I said earlier, you will not agree on everything, and that's fine. Okay? If you insist on agreeing with each other, then the marriage is either going to end up crushing one person or it's going to dissolve. I don't see any other options.
Okay. Try to get through some of these. Let's go through this one quickly. I don't know we need to spend a lot of time on this one. Do not respond in anger. Use a soft and kind response. That's how you want people to talk to you. So do like your mom told you and talk to people that way. All right? Be gentle and kind with how you speak. Be careful in those kinds of things. That's going to be key. This is somewhere I want to spend a little bit of time, okay? When you're wrong, admit it and ask for forgiveness, okay? There's a stereotype about one of the sexes never being wrong. I'm not going to say which one. But sometimes they can be wrong. If you recognize you're wrong, admit it. That typically is going to bring the lower temperature to the conversation. It's good communication. When you recognize you're wrong, admit it, call it out, and then ask for forgiveness, because we're all very capable of being wrong. So in those moments when we are, call it. Don't make your spouse have to drill it into you to prove to you that you're wrong. If you see that you're wrong, own it, admit it, ask for forgiveness. It's healthy for your relationship. It's healthy for conversation. I'm going to tag this next piece onto it as well, and then I'll let you speak to this. The next thing that I think is really, really key, when someone confesses to you, when they say they're wrong, forgive them, okay? One of the biggest issues that I've seen in marriages is not the person who's done something wrong and has confessed it. It's the person who refuses to forgive, okay? Now here's the deal. There's all sorts of relationships in the world that you have that if you don't want to forgive someone, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. Okay, now I think Jesus speaks to that. I think there's an issue of forgiveness that we can go to, but I'm going to say in the context of requiring you to have a relationship with them, you don't have to. You can forgive them and walk away and have zero relationship with them. It's acceptable. That's not the case in marriage. You've made a commitment to one another. You've made a commitment to God. So when one person acknowledges that they've messed up and they've asked for forgiveness, your job is to forgive them. And if you refuse to forgive them, it now becomes the bigger hindrance in the relationship. Okay? Now there's caveats to that too. There's ways that can go sideways. Sometimes people just screw up and they ask for forgiveness, but they don't learn anything from it, and they just keep doing the same kind of thing over and over again, okay? The perpetual ways that they actually take advantage of or abuse their spouse. There's all sorts of ways in which you can break this down. But generally speaking, especially in a healthy marriage, one that you want to succeed, where both people are trying to be honoring to God, if one person refuses to forgive the other, that becomes the major sticking point that will dissolve a relationship. Okay.
Go back to the previous slide. You don't have to ask forgiveness when you're wrong. You have to ask forgiveness when you have wronged someone. Now, if you mean by that, you've been hurtful, absolutely, 100%. But being wrong isn't necessarily being hurtful to another person, and we ask forgiveness when we have wounded.
When we've wronged someone.
When we have wronged someone.
Not when we've...
Not when we're just wrong.
Yeah. Oh,
So
I thought I
that's the
told you
caveat.
that this was on Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have to ask your forgiveness because I remembered the date wrong.
Yeah.
And so just that little caveat on that one, just to, when you are a jerk, admit it and ask forgiveness.
That's a good one.
All right.
I think it applies to wrong too. It's just the forgiveness piece doesn't necessarily apply to that one.
Exactly.
When you are wrong, own it.
Admit it.
When you've wronged someone, ask for forgiveness.
I
Admit
think
it, ask for forgiveness.
That would work great.
This is why I wanted to do this with you. You're finding ways that I can do this better. That's good. I know we've talked a lot about forgiveness in all sorts of different settings. Anything you want to add to that one?
No, that's right on.
Okay. Avoid nagging. It's in the Bible. Okay. It's not an effective way to communicate. And here, we laugh because we realize that it's not effective, okay? But we do it anyways, all right?
And it's in the Bible.
And
it really is.
And it really is in the Bible. Don't do it, all right? Your husband's going to go live on the corner
So
of
what's
the roof.
nagging? Well, that's the definition, right? How many times do you tell a person a thing before it becomes nagging?
Well, I mean, we got to factor in per day, per week. Like, what's the ratio?
Because my definition of nagging and her definition of nagging may be two different things, right? So it's interesting. We'll all agree, nagging. It's just that you never quite crossed that line, right?
Yeah.
In a relationship, though, you probably figure out when that person's now thinking you're nagging.
You think you can tell when the other person has decided that you're nagging? Yeah, probably so.
But sometimes your partner can be hypersensitive.
Yeah. Sometimes they're not good at listening. Yeah. There's a, do what? Selective hearing.
Selective hearing, or, I have to admit, Julie will tell me something, and frequently, if it's in that moment, if my mind is somewhere else, I won't remember it. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's interesting trying to find that line.
Who's the marriage guy who does seminars and stuff? He's really funny.
Gunger,
Is that it? Yeah.
Mark Gunger.
Mark Gunger. So he does this. I heard him speaking one time, and he told a story about this. And he said his wife was frustrated with him because there's a window that needed to be replaced in the shop. And she wanted it replaced. And he was upset because he's like, I told you I was going to get to it. And it's been 6 months, but he's still going to get to it. Like, I don't know why you're upset about.
That's
Yeah,
me.
exactly. And she doesn't want to nag him, right? And so she playfully, and I'm going to emphasize the word playfully here, okay, because I think that's a key part of this. And you know the difference. You know the difference between when you are playful or when you are harsh, okay? But playfully, she told him, I'm not going to have sex with you until you replace that window. Playfully. You have to emphasize the playfully, okay? He said, don't you know the window got replaced the next day? Right? Right? But she didn't want to nag, and so, but she kind of, played, and then he also says, don't you know she also paid up too? So like, that's the deal. Like, you can't make a deal like that and not fulfill your end of the bargain. But that's the thing, right? There's a difference. There's ways to communicate something that you feel like you've communicated already, but they're not listening. There's ways you can do it that aren't nagging. I think we understand. When we're talking about nagging, we're not talking about something that's uplifting, something that's encouraging. We're talking about something that's harsh. We're talking about something that's kind of negative, something that's aggressive, maybe, okay? All those kinds of pieces. Is that fair? Maybe? I don't know. If we would have got to fighting fairly, I would have told you that in one of the ways to fight in bad ways is that you withhold something from your spouse to make them suffer. That's a dangerous thing. So don't threaten things like sex or food or anything that means something to them. Don't threaten those things. That's damage to your marriage. That's why I emphasize the word playfully, okay? There's got to be a lightness if you're going to do those things, and there has to be a willingness to play along if it works. Okay, we're at 7:30. We've finished up. There's just a couple. I'm just going to fly through them real quick. Don't blame or criticize the other. Instead, restore them and encourage them, edify them. That should be what your marriage is supposed to be. There's someone you love. You love them. You picked them. You chose to spend the rest of your life with them. So encourage them and build them up. Don't blame them. Don't tear them down. Build them up, okay? If someone attacks or criticizes or blames you, don't respond in the same way. It takes two people to fight. And so good communication says, I don't have to speak at the same level that you're speaking. It doesn't have to be this way. Be someone who lowers the temperature, not who raises the temperature. You don't have to match them. And then try to understand the other person's opinion. Make allowances for differences. Be concerned about their interests. All of those are good, healthy ways to be able to communicate effectively within your marriage.
Does concern mean that you care about their football?
Yep, it does. It does. Be concerned about their football stuff. That's what that means. You married him. You knew he liked football then. You should probably have dealt with it before you got married. In fact, I think your mom probably even warned you about it. And so we shouldn't be talking about it 20 years later. All right. Anything else anybody's got to say? I think we're good. That was a very good question, though. Very good question. All right. Doc, why don't you pray for us?
Father, these things are sometimes laughable, but we all understand them because we all fall into these traps. It's not just a matter of just trying to be obedient when you tell us a better way. It's also, Lord, that we love people and we want to lift them up. And we want to be the people that you made us to be. So give us the wisdom and the courage to be people of God. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.